Good morning. I was thinking last night how much my life was affected by my parents' infidelities. I learned when I was only 5 years old through being molested by, well, a hired hand on my father's cattle ranch who also talked about sex with my father in front of me. And I was 5. So when he molested me, what he had said about to my dad received my attention. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It upset me almost as bad as being molested by a 45-year-old man who abducted me 3 times, took me down into the corn, and because of my dad being involved with this man, I couldn't ask him to help me. I didn't know what he would do because I felt like I had to say, "Daddy, what are you doing with that man?" Well, I didn't trust him not to go completely crazy if I said something like that, because he was hiding his gay activities with such, well, determination that I didn't think that he could take it. So I had to fight this 45-year-old man myself. There was no other choice. I couldn't tell my mother. She had a very hot temper. They already fought all the time because my dad was a drinker, hard drinker, and he'd go off and party with the guys he'd be gone all weekend. So I couldn't tell her about my dad because it might cause a terrible fight. She could even get murdered. And I thought for sure my dad would try to murder the hired hand who molested me if he found out about it. But I figured he might do that just because he wanted to shut his mouth, because he'd already shut his mouth off enough that big ears here, heard it. And what if he went to jail? And he was from a foreign country, Canada, so he might just mouth off and say all kinds of things. So it didn't make me feel very much better to think that my dad might murder him. And I thought, well, he's not going to be allowed to do that. So I would, when I went to school, I would tell my parents that I was afraid of coyotes, and they better be there at the bus to pick me up. Well, if they weren't, I'd give them hell, because I didn't think it would take much for the hired hand to find out that I was coming home alone through the fields, and who might waylay me again after I'd finally trained myself to stay right by my mother. No, 10 feet from her, and I kept my little sister there. And this is how I schemed and plotted as a child to evade him. And because I also thought, well, next time he takes me, he might even murder me. He hadn't really hurt me up till then, pain, but maybe he'd get carried away and rape. So this my father's infidelity caused terrible pain and decision making. I mean, I turned old before my time, because that's what happens when a little child has to deal with very hard stuff. So when parents don't stop and think, what if their children find out? My mother, I believe she didn't love my dad when she married him. But he was his dad had money, property, so I think she thought that they would do well, which they did. But I think my father suspected that she didn't love him because she was always flirting, and it wasn't very long. Well, after she had her tubes tied, so she couldn't come up pregnant with somebody else's, then she really started going wild, you might say, and told lies. It's a terrible thing to sit and listen to your mom lie. You want to love your mom. You don't want to. So I never stopped trying to talk to her. You know, I'd be little preacher me, trying to tell her, shouldn't lie to your kids. But I couldn't have that talk with her because she's too hot-tempered. If I did try to talk to her, she'd be so threatening that I'd have to shut up. She wasn't going to listen to me. She was going to do what she was going to do. And I think the very worst, most terrible thing that ever happened is when she was having an affair. I knew she was having it, and my husband came home and said that the man who was having an affair with her said in the pool hall he just had the best piece of ass that day. His mother-in-law. Oh, I felt like I'd got a dagger in my heart to think my mother was being talked about like that in the pool hall with the drunks. And every time my husband would see me with a big depressed look on my face, he'd say, uh-oh, you're thinking about your mom again, your mother. I'd say, yeah. And I vowed right then and there, I vowed I would never lie to my kids. Even if my husband would kill me, I was going to tell him the truth and not decide that I would live a life of lies, because what disillusionment for the kids. And that is what I practiced to my husband. I thought he deserved me to tell the truth, if nothing else. If I failed to love him, I better tell him the truth and get a divorce. Which my mother would probably have done that years before, but she was waiting around for the money and him to die. She'd even tell me, well, the doctor said he was going to die. Well, he's drinking and he hasn't died yet. Like, oh boy. Oh boy. No, he hadn't died yet. And one time he got very drunk. He drank rubbing alcohol, and she decided she wouldn't take him to the hospital. And he was laying in on the couch, and I thought if he drank a whole bottle of alcohol, he's probably going to die. So I'd run in there every little while and see if he was turning kind of blue, you know, he was sweating, and I thought, well, Mom's just gonna let him die here. Yeah, alcoholic kids from alcoholics parents live very hard lives. Well, he pulled through that. He didn't die. And she disappointed her again, and he'd even say that. Well, I'm just not dying soon enough to suit you. Well, yeah, you might say that their children lived a hard life. And you would be right. We did. So think about it. Think about it when you're tempted to lie to your husband, your boyfriend, to anybody. Wouldn't the truth be better, even if it hurt for the moment? But it can't hurt nearly as bad as lies, on and on forever, an eternity of telling lies if you go down that road. If you don't, if you commit yourself to absolute truth, even if you don't want to tell it, even if it hurts, even if you're afraid, that is the best thing you can do for your kids.